The doctors said it was his end, but the Mexican janitor did something incredible. In the most renowned hospital in New York City, the most experienced doctors in the country gathered for the third time that week to discuss a case that left them without answers. None of them could explain why Michael Thompson, a businessman of only 34 years, remained in a deep coma for nearly 4 months without any sign of significant improvement. It was during one of these meetings that Mrs. Rose, the janitor who had been cleaning those hallways for 17 years, stopped in front of room 512 and observed through the window the young man connected to various machines. She held the broom handle firmly while discreet tears streamed down her time-worn face. "Are you all right?" asked Emily, a young nurse passing through the hallway. Mrs. Rose quickly wiped her eyes and nodded, returning to work without saying a word. But Emily noticed something different in that woman's gaze. It was as if she was seeing more than just an unconscious patient. That night, after all the visitors had left and the hallways grew quiet, Mrs. Rose returned to room 512. She looked both ways, making sure she was alone, and entered with careful steps. From the pocket of her grey uniform, she pulled out a small cloth bag containing dried leaves that emitted a soft, unfamiliar scent. "You're going to be fine, my son," she whispered softly, bringing the leaves closer to Michael's pillow. "I know you will." Jessica Thompson arrived at the hospital every day at 7 in the morning and only left after midnight. Her eyes were constantly swollen from crying, and her pale skin betrayed the months of anguish. She held her husband's cold hand and talked to him as if he could hear her, telling him about her day, about the business she was trying to keep running, about how much she missed his smiles and hugs. "The doctors want to have a meeting tomorrow," said Jessica, her voice choked. "Doctor, Robert said we need to talk about the options. Michael, please give me a sign, anything. Move a finger, open your eyes just for a second. I need to know you're still here." But Michael remained motionless, only the rhythmic sound of the machines breaking the heavy silence of the room. Dr. Robert Anderson was considered one of the best neurologists in the United States. He had handled complex cases, published articles in international journals, and trained dozens of doctors. But Michael Thompson's case deeply troubled him. All tests indicated minimal brain activity, with no real prospect of recovery. It was time to have that difficult conversation with the family. "Jessica, I need to be honest with you," said the doctor, sitting beside her in the small waiting room. "It's been almost 4 months. Michael hasn't shown any significant improvement. The tests show his brain activity is getting weaker." "But he's still alive," replied Jessica, clasping her hands tightly. "As long as his heart beats, there's hope. I understand what you're feeling, but we need to be realistic. The machines are maintaining his vital functions, but this isn't living. You need to think about what Michael would want." Jessica stood up abruptly, her hands trembling with anger and pain. "Don't ask me to give up on my husband. I won't do that. Never." Sarah Thompson had interrupted her medical residency in cardiology in Great Britain as soon as she heard about the accident that left her father in a coma. She returned to the United States, determined to use all her knowledge to help him. But after weeks of analyzing tests, consulting specialists, and reading studies, she reached the same devastating conclusion as the other doctors. There wasn't much more that could be done. "Mom, you need to listen to what Dr. Robert is saying," said Sarah, holding her mother's hands. "I know it's difficult, but keeping Dad like this isn't fair to him." "How can you say that?" Jessica looked at her daughter with disbelief. "You're a doctor. You should be looking for solutions, not asking me to turn off the machines." "I spent months looking for solutions. There's nothing more we can do. The neurological damage is irreversible." The discussion was interrupted when Emily, the nurse, entered the room with a worried expression. "Sorry to interrupt, but I need to talk to you about something that's happening. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing." Emily led Jessica and Sarah to room 512, where they found Mrs. Rose beside Michael's bed. The janitor was holding one of his hands while carefully placing some green leaves near the pillow with the other. She was softly humming a gentle melody that seemed to echo through the room's walls. "What's going on here?" asked Sarah, her voice filled with surprise and confusion. Mrs. Rose turned slowly without letting go of Michael's hand. Her brown eyes met Jessica's, and for a moment, the two women simply looked at each other in silence. "Excuse me, ma'am," said Mrs. Rose in a calm voice. "I didn't mean to startle you. It's just that I know I can help your husband." "Help?" Sarah took a step forward. "You're a janitor. You don't have medical training. What do you think you're doing?" "Sarah, wait." Jessica raised her hand, interrupting her daughter. "Let her speak." Mrs. Rose took a deep breath before continuing. "My name is Rose Williams. I've worked at this hospital for 17 years cleaning these hallways, and in all that time I've seen many things. I've seen people the doctors said had no chance left recover. I've seen miracles happen when no one else believed." "Miracles aren't science," Sarah retorted. "My father needs proper medical treatment, not superstition." "I'm not talking about superstition, miss. I'm talking about knowledge that comes from far away, from long ago. My grandmother was a midwife and healer in rural Vermont. She knew plants. She knew how to use the herbs of the earth to heal. She taught me everything before she passed." Jessica approached Mrs. Rose, studying her face carefully. There was something in this woman's sincerity that touched her desperate heart deeply. "What are these leaves?" asked Jessica, pointing to the pillow. "It's a plant called lemon balm, not the common one everyone knows, but a special variety that only grows in certain regions. It has calming properties that help the mind truly rest to recover. I've been placing it near him every night for 2 weeks." "2 weeks?" Sarah was astonished. "You've been doing this without authorization for 2 weeks. I couldn't stand by watching this young man like this, miss. I just couldn't. Every time I looked at him, I saw—" Mrs. Rose stopped speaking abruptly, her eyes welling up. She let go of Michael's hand and took a step back, as if she had said too much. "Saw what?" Jessica insisted gently. "Please finish." "Saw my son," whispered Mrs. Rose, letting the tears flow freely now. "Saw my Johnny, who was also in a bed like this, many years ago. The doctors said the same thing, that there was nothing more to do, that we should prepare for the worst. But I didn't give up. I used everything my grandmother taught me, stayed by his side day and night, and he came back. My boy came back to me." The room fell silent. Even Sarah, with all her medical training and skepticism, felt a tightness in her chest at the janitor's confession. "And your son?" asked Jessica. "Where is he now?" Mrs. Rose's face contorted with pain, and she needed a few seconds to be able to respond. "He's no longer here. But while he was, every day was a blessing. And everything he went through in the coma, everything I learned taking care of him, couldn't have been in vain. That's why I work in this hospital. That's why I pay attention to every difficult case. Because if I can help even just one person return to their family like my Johnny came back to me, then his departure will have had a meaning." Jessica covered her mouth with her hands, moved. She looked at Michael, then at Mrs. Rose, and then at her daughter. "Sarah, please," Jessica pleaded. "Let her try. What do we have to lose?" "Mum, this is crazy. Medicinal plants aren't going to reverse neurological damage. This has no scientific basis." "But it won't do any harm either, will it?" Jessica argued. "If the doctors have already given up, if you all already think there's no hope left, then why not let someone who still believes try something?" Sarah ran her hand through her hair, frustrated. She knew her mother was desperate, clinging to any spark of hope, no matter how irrational it was. But as a daughter and as a doctor, she couldn't simply allow unproven practices to be applied to her father. "All right," Sarah conceded finally, to everyone's surprise. "But with conditions. I want to know exactly what you're going to do, which plants you're going to use, and I'll research each one of them. Anything that could be harmful, and it stops immediately. Understood?" Mrs. Rose nodded, a small smile of gratitude lighting up her tired face. "Thank you, miss. You won't regret it." In the following days, Mrs. Rose established a routine. She arrived at the hospital an hour early, even before her shift began, to prepare the treatments for Michael. She brought fresh herbs in small cloth bags, which she herself harvested at a property on the outskirts of the city that belonged to a friend. Sometimes, when she couldn't find what she needed, she traveled to the countryside of Vermont to get specific plants from healers who still kept ancestral knowledge alive. Emily, the young nurse, became an unexpected ally. She was fascinated watching Mrs. Rose work, the careful way she handled each leaf, each root, each flower. The janitor patiently explained the properties of each plant, as her grandmother had taught her. This one is lemon balm, different from the common lemon balm. It helps calm the nervous system, facilitates the deep rest the body needs to heal, explained Mrs. Rose while preparing a mild infusion. And this is valerian, but you have to use it very carefully, in the right amount. It helps the mind not to be so agitated inside. Inside? Asked Emily. When a person is in a coma, the mind isn't still, child. It's working, fighting, trying to find the way back. These plants help in that journey, make the path less rough. Emily absorbed every word. There was something in Mrs. Rose's wisdom that medical books had never captured, a human understanding of illness and healing that went beyond tests and diagnoses. "Do you really believe he's going to wake up?" Emily asked in a whisper. Mrs. Rose looked at Michael, her expression serious but determined. "I believe that while there's life, there's hope, and I believe that this young man has a strong will to live. I feel it when I hold his hand, when I sing to him. He's fighting inside, he just needs help finding his way back." Meanwhile, Sarah began discreetly observing everything Mrs. Rose did. She wrote down the names of the plants, researched them online and in scientific articles, trying to find some rational explanation for the janitor's methods. To her surprise, she discovered that some of the mentioned plants actually had studies proving neuroprotective and anti-inflammatory properties. One article in particular caught her attention, a European study on the use of specific natural compounds in the recovery of patients with traumatic brain injuries. The results were preliminary but promising. Sarah felt a mix of emotions, relief at finding some scientific basis, but also a strange irritation at having to admit that perhaps there was something valid in traditional methods. However, not everyone at the hospital viewed the situation favorably. Dr. Robert was outraged when he learned that a janitor was applying unconventional treatments to a patient under his care. "This is unacceptable," he practically shouted in his office, with Sarah standing before him. "We can't allow staff without medical training to experiment on patients. This could set terrible legal precedents for the hospital." "They're not experiments, Dr. Robert," Sarah defended, surprising herself. "She's using plants that have proven properties. I researched them myself." "Proven by whom?" By folk healers from the countryside." The sarcasm was evident in his voice. "Sarah, you're a brilliant doctor. Don't let desperation about your father's condition cloud your scientific judgment." "It's not desperation. It's keeping an open mind to possibilities that traditional medicine might not fully understand yet." Dr. Robert shook his head in disbelief. "I'll have to report this to the administration. I can't be complicit with practices that jeopardize the hospital's integrity." "Give it a week," Sarah pleaded. "Just 1 week. If there's no change in my father's tests, I'll personally ask Mrs. Rose to stop. But if there's any improvement, however small, then we need to consider that maybe she's on the right track." Dr. Robert looked at his protégé for a long moment. He had known Sarah since she was a medical student, had watched her professional growth, and had always admired her sharp scientific mind. Seeing her defend alternative practices was disconcerting. 1 week, he finally agreed. "But I'll personally monitor Michael's vital signs, any negative change, and this stops immediately." That night, Mrs. Rose stayed longer than usual by Michael's side. She had brought something special, an old guitar that had belonged to her late husband. The strings were slightly out of tune, but she adjusted them with experienced fingers before starting to play. Jessica, who was still at the hospital, heard the music coming from her husband's room and went to investigate. She stopped at the door, watching the scene before her. Mrs. Rose sitting by the bedside, gently strumming the guitar while singing an old melody, a lullaby that echoed through the cold walls of the hospital room. "That was my husband's favorite song," Jessica said softly, her words interrupting the music. "How did you know?" Mrs. Rose stopped playing and smiled gently. "You were humming that melody the other day when you were here alone with him. I thought it was important. Music has a special power to touch the soul, to reach places that words cannot." Jessica entered the room and sat on the other side of the bed, holding Michael's free hand. "Tell me about your son," Jessica requested. What happened to him? Mrs. Rose set the guitar aside, her hands finding the instrument's strings as if seeking comfort in their familiar touch. John was 18 when he had the accident. He worked at a mechanic's shop to help with household expenses. One day, a car fell on him. He was in a coma for almost 3 months. The doctors, just like they're doing now with your Michael, said there was no hope, that he wouldn't return. But he did come back, said Jessica, more as a statement than a question. He came back, slowly, day by day. I did what my grandmother taught me. I used the plants, sang to him, talked about everything. I told stories of our life, of the plans we had for the future. And one day, after so long, he opened his eyes. Jessica felt tears streaming down her face. And he got better? Recovered completely? Mrs. Rose took a deep breath, the pain still alive in her eyes even after so many years. Yes, he did. He needed physical therapy, time to relearn some things, but he became himself again. He had 5 more years of full life after that. 5 years that the doctors said wouldn't exist. 5 years, repeated Jessica. What happened after? He passed away. Not because of the accident, but through other paths of life. But those 5 years, each day, each smile, each conversation, they were worth all the effort, all the struggle, and they taught me that life is precious, that it's worth fighting until the last moment, that we can't give up while there's a thread of hope. The 2 women stayed silent for a moment, united by pain and hope, so different in their origins and lives, but so similar in their love and their refusal to give up. Mrs. Rose, said Jessica finally, no matter what the doctors say, no matter what my daughter thinks, I want you to continue. Do everything you can for my Michael. Please. I will, my dear. I swear by all that is holy, I will. The days turned into a delicate routine. Mrs. Rose arrived early, prepared her infusions and compresses, positioned the aromatic plants around Michael's room. She talked to him in a low voice, telling stories, singing songs, holding his hand for long periods. Emily helped whenever she could, learning and documenting everything in a private notebook. Sarah maintained her scientific vigilance, monitoring every exam, every vital sign. She created a detailed spreadsheet where she recorded all of Mrs. Rose's interventions and compared them with the readings from the machines. She was determined to find correlations, to understand if there was really any measurable change. On the 4th day of the week that Dr. Robert had granted, something unexpected happened. It was around 3 in the morning, and Emily was doing her night rounds. She entered room 512 to check Michael's vital signs when she noticed something strange on the monitors. The brain activity, which had been showing consistently low patterns for months, presented small intermittent spikes. She immediately called the on-duty doctor, who confirmed the reading and ordered new tests. In the morning, when Dr. Robert arrived and saw the results, his skepticism began to waver. "This doesn't make sense," he murmured, studying the graphs. "His brain activity is increasing. Not much, but it's a measurable change." Sarah, who had been urgently called to the hospital, looked at the same tests with a racing heart. "What does this mean?" asked Jessica, who had also rushed there as soon as she was notified. "It means something is happening," answered Sarah, her voice trembling with contained emotion. "Dad's brain is responding. We don't know to what exactly, but it's responding." "To the plants," said a calm voice from the door. It was Mrs. Rose, who had just arrived for her shift. "He's responding to the treatment. I told you he was fighting in there." Dr. Robert turned to her, his face a mask of confusion and reluctant admiration. "We can't say for certain that it's the plants," he said, maintaining his professional tone. "It could be a coincidence, a natural fluctuation." "With all due respect, Doctor," Mrs. Rose firmly retorted. "You yourself said he hadn't shown improvement for months, and now after a week of my treatment, these changes appear. I don't believe in coincidences when it comes to healing. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps those of us who are just starting out, now continuing." The news of Michael's improvement spread quickly through the hospital. Some doctors seemed intrigued, others remained skeptical, but all agreed that something unusual was happening. Dr. Robert, despite his strictly scientific training, couldn't ignore the data. He authorized Mrs. Rose to continue her treatment, though he insisted on maintaining rigorous monitoring. In the following days, Mrs. Rose intensified her efforts. She began performing gentle massages on specific points of Michael's body, on his temples, wrists, feet, following techniques her grandmother had taught her decades ago. She explained to Emily and anyone else who would listen that these were areas where vital energy flowed, where the connection between body and mind was strongest. Ancient medicine understood the body as a whole, Mrs. Rose explained while she worked, not just separate organs, but a complete system where everything is connected. When we care for one part, we're caring for the whole. Jessica began attending every session, watching Mrs. Rose's every move with reverent attention. She had started helping too, following the janitor's instructions on how to hold Michael's hand, how to talk to him more effectively. "Don't talk to him as if you're giving him news," Mrs. Rose instructed. "Talk as if he were awake, sitting beside you. Share details, colors, smells, sensations. Awaken his senses with your words." Jessica followed the advice. She began narrating her most vivid memories, the first time they met at a mutual friend's wedding, where he spilled red wine on his own white shirt trying to impress her, the trip they took to Cape Cod, where they got caught in the rain and had to take shelter in a small historic chapel, the day Sarah was born, and how Michael cried with emotion when he held his daughter for the first time. "Remember when Sarah was 5 and you tried to teach her to ride a bike in the park?" Jessica held Michael's hand as she spoke, a small smile on her lips. "She fell so much we came home with both knees scraped. You were more traumatized than she was, saying you were a terrible father. But the next day, she woke up asking to try again because you'd said quitting wasn't the Thompson way." It was during one of these memory sessions that something extraordinary happened. Jessica was telling about their 10th wedding anniversary, when Michael had surprised her by preparing a romantic dinner at home, but completely burned the meat in the oven. She laughed while recalling it, and then felt something, a subtle squeeze, almost imperceptible, in the hand she was holding. "Michael," she whispered, her eyes wide. "Are you hearing me?" "Squeeze my hand again. Please squeeze." Mrs. Rose, who was on the other side of the bed adjusting the plants, stopped immediately. Emily, who was checking the monitors, also froze. All eyes were fixed on the couple's intertwined hands. For a few seconds that seemed like an eternity. Nothing happened. Then, as softly as the first time, Michael's fingers contracted slightly around Jessica's hand. "He squeezed," Jessica almost shouted, tears streaming freely down her face. "He squeezed my hand." Emily ran out of the room to call the doctors. Mrs. Rose remained where she was, an expression of deep gratitude on her face, her hands clasped in front of her chest, as in silent prayer. Dr. Robert came running, followed by Sarah and 2 other doctors. They conducted a series of tests, stimulating different parts of Michael's body while observing his responses. The results were undeniable. There was voluntary motor activity, however minimal. "This is extraordinary," admitted Dr. Robert, looking at the results with admiration and disbelief. "In all my years of practice, I've never seen recovery begin so spontaneously after months of deep coma." Sarah embraced her mother, both crying with relief and joy. Then, to everyone's surprise, Sarah approached Mrs. Rose and hugged her too. "Thank you," whispered Sarah. "Thank you for not giving up when all of us were ready to." Mrs. Rose stroked the young doctor's hair, her own tears dampening the white coat. "Don't thank me yet, my dear. He still has a long road ahead, but now we know he wants to travel that road. He's coming back to us." From that moment on, Michael's recovery became the focus of the entire hospital. Doctors who were once skeptical began asking questions, wanting to understand exactly what Mrs. Rose was doing. She, always humble, patiently explained each plant, each technique, each principle behind her methods. A young resident named Jason became particularly fascinated. He began recording Mrs. Rose's explanations, asking permission to document everything. He was convinced there was something important there that deserved proper study. "Modern medicine is incredible, don't get me wrong," Jason said, sitting beside Mrs. Rose during one of her sessions with Michael. "But sometimes I think we've specialized so much that we forget to look at the patient as a whole. You have this holistic view that we lost somewhere along the way." "You didn't lose it, my boy," Mrs. Rose replied kindly. "You just forgot where you put it, but it's all still there waiting to be rediscovered. My grandmother used to say that true knowledge never dies. It just sleeps until someone comes to wake it up again." In the second week after the first hand squeeze, Michael began showing more signs of consciousness. His eyes, which had remained closed for months, began moving beneath his eyelids during certain conversations. On one occasion, when Jessica played his favorite song on her phone, a single tear trickled from the corner of his eye. Mrs. Rose explained this was an excellent sign. It meant the connection between emotions and physical responses was strengthening. She adjusted her treatment, introducing new plants that, according to her knowledge, specifically helped with neurological recovery. One was ginkgo biloba, which she sourced from a specialized herb shop in downtown New York City. Another was a rare variety of rosemary that grew only at certain altitudes in the Appalachian Mountains. Mrs. Rose insisted on personally sourcing each ingredient, traveling for hours when necessary, using her own money to buy what she couldn't find for free. When Jessica discovered this, she was deeply moved. "Mrs. Rose, please let me pay for all this. You're spending so much time and money." "No, my dear," Mrs. Rose firmly refused. "This I do from the heart. It's not work. It's a mission. It's how I honor my John, to give meaning to what I went through with him. Money can't buy this feeling of helping someone return to life." But Jessica found a way to repay her. She began helping Mrs. Rose on her plant-gathering trips, driving out to the countryside, meeting the healers and herbalists the janitor consulted. On these journeys, the two women developed a deep friendship, sharing their stories, their fears, their hopes. "You know, Mrs. Rose," said Jessica during one of those trips, while they were driving along a dirt road toward a farm in Vermont, "I always thought I had to be strong, that I had to keep everything under control. But ever since Michael fell into a coma, I've discovered that strength isn't that. Strength is accepting help. It's trusting other people. It's having the humility to recognize when we don't know everything." Mrs. Rose looked out the window at the green mountains, stretching into the distance, a small smile on her face. "Life has an interesting way of teaching these lessons, doesn't it? Sometimes it needs to break us a little so we can see where the cracks were that we didn't want to admit." Meanwhile, at the hospital, Sarah had begun her own journey of discovery. She started researching integrative medicine intensively, about the use of natural compounds in neurology, about the relationship between traditional practices and modern science. What began as skepticism had turned into genuine curiosity, and that curiosity was opening new paths in her understanding of medicine. She contacted researchers at universities who studied ethnobotany and neurology, sharing her father's case and the methods Mrs. Rose was using. Some showed interest, others remained skeptical, but Sarah persisted, convinced that there was something important there that deserved serious investigation. A neurology professor at NYU, Dr. William Cooper, became particularly interested. He visited the hospital to personally observe Michael's case and speak with Mrs. Rose. He was impressed not only with the patient's recovery, but with the depth of traditional knowledge the janitor possessed. "It's fascinating," commented Dr. William after a long conversation with Mrs. Rose. "Much of what she describes correlates with recent scientific discoveries about neuroplasticity and brain recovery. It's as if this ancestral knowledge intuited truths that we're only now beginning to prove in the laboratory." He proposed a detailed case study, documenting Michael's recovery and the methods used. Sarah enthusiastically agreed, seeing in this an opportunity to scientifically legitimize practices that had been ignored or ridiculed for so long. In the third week, Michael opened his eyes for the first time. It was during a rainy September morning, while Mrs. Rose was softly singing by his bedside. His eyelids fluttered once, twice, and then slowly opened, revealing brown eyes that seemed disoriented, but aware. "Michael!" Jessica, who was sitting on the other side of the bed, jumped from her chair. "You're awake! You're here!" Michael's eyes moved slowly toward his wife's voice. He tried to speak, but only a hoarse, incomprehensible sound came from his throat. Months without using his vocal cords had left his voice weak and unsteady. "Don't try to speak yet," said Mrs. Rose gently. "Your body needs time to remember how to do these things. Take it slow, one step at a time." Doctors and nurses quickly arrived in the room, performing exams and tests. Michael responded to simple commands, squeezing hands, following objects with his eyes, moving his fingers. Each small movement was a victory, a confirmation that consciousness was returning. Dr. Robert, observing the whole scene, shook his head in silent admiration. He had seen many cases in his career, but never anything like this. A patient whom everyone, including himself, had considered lost, coming back to life after months of deep coma. "It's a medical miracle," he commented later in an interview he gave to a local newspaper interested in the story. Or perhaps it's just a reminder that there's still much we don't know about the human brain and the healing processes. But Mrs. Rose, when asked what she thought had caused Michael's recovery, had a different answer. It wasn't a miracle. It was love, dedication, patience and knowledge passed down through generations. It was believing when there was no reason to believe. It was refusing to accept the impossible as the final answer. Michael's recovery was gradual but consistent. He began to speak, first simple words and then more complex sentences. His memory was intact. He remembered Jessica, Sarah, his life before the accident. But the recent months were a fog, fragments of sounds and sensations he couldn't fully connect. "I heard voices," he shared one day, his voice still weak but firmer. "Especially yours, Jess. You were always there, talking to me, telling stories. And there was an older woman's voice, singing old songs. It was comforting." Jessica looked at Mrs. Rose, who was in the corner of the room organizing her plants, and smiled. "She was always here, love, taking care of you when the doctors had given up." Michael turned his head with effort to look at the janitor. Their eyes met, and even without words there was a deep understanding between them. "Thank you," he said simply, "for not giving up on me." Mrs. Rose approached the bed, her calloused hands gently holding Michael's. "It wasn't me who didn't give up, my son. It was you. You fought hard in there, fought to find your way back. I just lit a few lights along the path. The following weeks were of intensive physical therapy and rehabilitation. Michael had to relearn basic movements, rebuild the muscle strength he had lost during the months of immobility. It was frustrating and painful, but he faced each challenge with determination, always encouraged by Jessica, Sarah, and Mrs. Rose. Mrs. Rose continued her treatment with the plants, adjusting the formulas as Michael progressed. Now, besides aiding neurological recovery, the plants served to strengthen the immune system, relieve muscle pain, and improve sleep. Every choice was careful, every dosage precise. Sarah observed everything with a researcher's eyes. She kept detailed records of every plant used, every result observed. With the help of Dr. William Cooper, she was compiling a case study that could, she hoped, open doors for more research on the integration between traditional and modern medicine. "You know," Sarah said to Mrs. Rose one day while watching Michael doing physical therapy exercises, "I spent years studying Western medicine, learning about anatomy, physiology, pharmacology. I thought I knew everything I needed to know to be a good doctor. But you taught me something no professor could, that medicine isn't just about curing diseases, but about caring for people." Mrs. Rose placed her hand on the young doctor's shoulder, her expression full of maternal affection. "You already knew that, my child. You just needed a reminder. The best medicine has always been the one that combines the knowledge of the mind with the wisdom of the heart." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, feel free to leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out now continuing. But not everything was smooth in the recovery journey. There were difficult days, moments when Michael felt intense pain, or when the frustration of not being able to do simple things consumed him. There were moments when Jessica cried hidden in the hallways, emotionally exhausted by the stress of the recent months. And there were moments when even Mrs. Rose questioned if her methods were truly enough, if she wasn't asking too much of Michael's body. It was during one of these difficult moments, about 5 weeks after Michael woke up, that the real test arrived. Michael had developed a respiratory infection, a common but dangerous complication in patients who had spent a long time in a coma. His fever rose rapidly, and the doctors began administering strong antibiotics. "I'm not sure if it will work," admitted Dr. Robert, looking at the test results with concern. "His immune system is very fragile after being inactive for so long. If the infection spreads," he didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone understood the danger. After so much struggle, after so much recovery, Michael could still lose this battle. Mrs. Rose didn't sleep that night. She remained by Michael's bedside, preparing compresses with plants that had natural antibacterial properties, singing old healing songs, her hands never stopping their work. Jessica was on the other side, holding her husband's hand, whispering words of encouragement even though she knew he was unconscious from the fever. Sarah moved between checking the monitors and frantically researching complementary treatments for infections on her laptop. Emily brought fresh water and clean towels, helping Mrs. Rose change the compresses. It was as if everyone was in an invisible battle, fighting against a microscopic enemy that threatened to steal the victory they had worked so hard to achieve. "He can't leave us now," murmured Jessica, tears silently streaming down her face. "Not after everything, not after getting him back." "And he won't," said Mrs. Rose firmly, although her own hands trembled slightly as she prepared another compress. "This boy has already shown he's a fighter. He won't give up now." The night seemed endless. The hours dragged on, marked only by the beeps of the monitors and the soft sounds of the prayers Mrs. Rose murmured as she worked. Around 3 in the morning, Michael began to shake violently, his body racked with chills. Jessica covered him with more blankets, but he kept trembling, his lips turning purple. "He's getting worse," said Emily, looking at the monitors with alarm. "I'll call Dr. Robert." But before she could leave, Mrs. Rose grabbed her by the arm. "Wait, child. The chills are good. It means the body is fighting, that the fever is trying to break. It's when it seems worse that sometimes the cure is closest." And she was right. About an hour later, the shaking began to subside. Michael's temperature, which had reached dangerous levels, began to drop gradually. By 6 in the morning, as the sun began to lighten the New York City sky, he was breathing more easily, his skin regaining a healthier color. Dr. Robert arrived for his morning rounds and was surprised to find Michael stable and improving. New tests showed that the infection was receding, his body finally responding to the antibiotics. "How?" he asked, looking at Mrs. Rose, who appeared exhausted but relieved. "How did you know he would get better?" "Experience, doctor. I've been through nights like this before. You learn to read the body's signals, to understand what it's saying, even when all the numbers say otherwise." Dr. Robert shook his head, a look of genuine respect on his face. "You should be teaching at a medical school, not cleaning hallways." Mrs. Rose smiled wearily. "I clean hallways because I chose to clean hallways, doctor. And along that path I found my true calling. I don't need a diploma on the wall to know I'm making a difference." Michael's recovery from the infection marked a turning point. From then on, his progress accelerated. He began sitting up in bed for longer periods, then taking a few steps with support. His voice grew stronger, his memories sharper. Each day, he looked more like the man he was before the accident. But the experience had changed all of them in profound ways. Michael spoke of having a new perspective on life, about what truly mattered. Jessica had discovered an inner strength she didn't know she possessed, and an unexpected friendship with a woman she otherwise would never have truly known. Sarah was rethinking her entire approach to medicine, questioning the arbitrary boundaries between different healing systems, and Mrs. Rose, well, she remained Mrs. Rose, humble, dedicated, and now famous throughout the hospital as the janitor who had achieved the impossible. The story began to spread beyond the hospital walls. A local newspaper ran a story. Then a television network wanted to film a report. Suddenly, Mrs. Rose was being sought by people from across the country, wanting to know more about her methods, asking for help for their own loved ones in desperate situations. "I don't know how to handle this," Mrs. Rose confessed to Jessica one day, looking at a pile of letters she had received. "I'm just a janitor. I'm not a doctor. I don't have the authority to give medical advice to all these people. But you have knowledge, Jessica replied, and experience, and a heart that truly cares. That's worth more than any diploma. It was then that Jessica had an idea. She spoke with Michael, who was growing stronger by the day, and then with the hospital administration. The proposal was simple but revolutionary. Create a pilot program for integrative medicine at the hospital, combining conventional medical treatments with complementary therapies based on traditional knowledge. And Mrs. Rose would be the program's lead consultant. At first, there was resistance. Some doctors saw it as a downgrading of scientific medicine, a concession to superstition. But Dr. Robert, whose opinion carried great weight, publicly supported the idea. "I've seen with my own eyes results I can't explain with my medical training," he said at a clinical staff meeting. "I'm not saying we should abandon evidence-based medicine, but perhaps we should expand our definition of what constitutes evidence. The case of Michael Thompson is evidence that cannot be ignored." The program was approved on an experimental basis, with an initial duration of 1 year. Mrs. Rose reluctantly agreed to participate, but with one condition: she would continue being a janitor. She didn't want to stop cleaning the hallways, talking with patients while cleaning their rooms, being part of the hospital's invisible yet essential infrastructure. "It's through cleaning that I truly get to know the patients," she explained. "It's when I'm mopping the floor that they open up to me, that they tell me their pains and fears. If I become a consultant sitting in an office, I lose that connection." So it was decided that she would work in both roles: janitor during part of the day, integrative medicine consultant during the other part. It was an unusual arrangement, but it seemed fitting for a woman who had defied conventions throughout her life. The first months of the program were challenging. There were many issues to resolve: which treatments would be offered, how to ensure patient safety, how to train the medical staff to work alongside traditional therapies. Sarah, who had decided to stay in the United States instead of returning to her residency in Great Britain, became the bridge between the two worlds, translating Mrs. Rose's knowledge into terms her medical colleagues could understand and accept. They started slowly, with carefully selected cases where traditional medicine had reached its limits. Not all were successes. Some patients didn't respond to complementary treatments. Some continued to decline despite all efforts. But there were enough successes to keep the program alive and growing. One case in particular stayed in everyone's memory. It was an elderly lady named Mrs. Eleanor who had suffered from chronic pain for years. No painkiller seemed to work, and she had developed an opioid dependency in an attempt to control the pain. Mrs. Rose worked with her for months, using a combination of massages with specific plant oils, medicinal teas, and talking sessions where she simply listened to the patient's life story. Slowly, Mrs. Eleanor's pains began to lessen. More importantly, she managed to significantly reduce her dependency on strong medications. When asked what had worked, Mrs. Eleanor replied, "It was the first time in years that someone really listened to me, not just my symptoms, but my story, my losses, my loneliness. The pain in my body lessened because the pain in my soul was acknowledged." This holistic approach, treating the patient as a whole person instead of a collection of symptoms, became the hallmark of the program. And more doctors, initially skeptical, began to see value in this perspective. Meanwhile, Michael continued his own journey. After almost 2 months in the hospital after waking up, he was finally discharged. But his life had fundamentally changed. He couldn't simply go back to being the workaholic businessman he was before. His body was still recovering, but more than that, his priorities had shifted. "You know," he said to Jessica one night, already at home, lying together in the bed they hadn't shared for months, "I don't remember almost anything from the time I spent in a coma, but I remember a feeling. It was like being trapped in a dark place, knowing that light exists somewhere, but not being able to find it. And then there were these voices. Your voice, Sarah's voice, and this older woman's voice singing. These voices were like threads of light that I followed, trying to find my way back." "Mrs. Rose was always there," said Jessica, stroking her husband's face. "When even I stopped believing, when the doctors said to give up, she was there, believing for all of us." "I want to do something for her," said Michael. I want to give back in some way. That's how the John Foundation was born, named in honor of Mrs. Rose's deceased son. The Foundation's mission was to support research on integrative medicine, document traditional healing knowledge before it was lost, and provide free access to complementary treatments for people who couldn't afford them. Mrs. Rose initially protested against having something named in memory of her son, feeling it was too grand, far beyond what she deserved. But Michael insisted, "Your John is no longer here, but the knowledge you gained caring for him helped bring me back. How many other people could be helped by that same knowledge? The Foundation will ensure that his wisdom, passed through you, is not lost." With tears in her eyes, Mrs. Rose finally accepted. The John Foundation was officially launched 6 months after Michael was discharged from the hospital. The launch event was held at the hospital itself, with doctors, researchers, patients, and their families in attendance. Dr. Robert gave a speech, talking about the importance of keeping an open mind in medicine, of remembering that not all knowledge comes from labs and clinical studies. Sarah presented the preliminary results of the hospital's integrative medicine program, showing encouraging data on effectiveness and patient satisfaction. But it was Mrs. Rose's speech that truly touched hearts. Standing on the small stage, in her grey janitor's uniform that she had insisted on wearing despite Jessica offering to buy her a new dress, she spoke in her simple but profound voice. "I am not a special person," she began. "I'm just a janitor who learned a few things from my grandmother. But my grandmother was wise. She knew that healing doesn't only come from medicine and machines, as important as they are. Healing comes from care, from attention, from love. It comes from not giving up when everything seems lost. It comes from believing in the strength of life, which always wants to continue, always wants to flourish even under the most difficult conditions." She paused, her eyes scanning the faces in the audience. "My son John taught me that. He fought so hard to live, and even though his life was short, it was precious. Every day mattered. And if this foundation can help other families have more days with their loved ones, then my John's life will have had an even greater meaning than I could have imagined." There wasn't a dry eye in the auditorium when she finished. Jessica and Sarah went up on stage to hug her, followed by Michael, who still used a cane for support but was getting stronger every day. The image of the four together, the recovered patient, his wife and daughter, and the janitor who had refused to accept the impossible, was on the front page of several newspapers the next day. But for Mrs. Rose, the most important thing wasn't the photographs or the media attention. It was the fact that, days after the Foundation's launch, she received a letter from a mother in another state, telling her that her son had woken up from a coma after local doctors, inspired by Michael's story, had consulted about complementary methods and implemented some of the treatments that Mrs. Rose used. "This," she said to Emily, holding the letter with trembling hands, "this is what matters. Not fame, not recognition, but knowing that maybe somewhere another family didn't have to face the loss that I faced, that maybe another mother has more time with her son because of what we learned." Life went on, and with it, more stories of recovery, more cases of people that conventional medicine had given up on, but who found hope and healing through the combination of treatments. The hospital's integrative medicine program grew, gaining more resources, more space, more recognition. Other hospitals in the United States started similar programs, always consulting Mrs. Rose and her team. Sarah published several scientific articles about the cases they had followed, always careful to maintain methodological rigor, but also to give credit to traditional practices. She became an important voice in the integrative medicine movement in the United States, being invited to speak at conferences and universities. But perhaps the most profound change happened in the small daily interactions. Doctors who would never have considered asking a patient about home remedies they used now did so routinely. Nurses learned about basic medicinal plants and their uses. Patients felt more empowered to participate in their own treatments, sharing knowledge that their own grandmothers had taught them. And Mrs. Rose continued being Mrs. Rose. She still arrived early at the hospital to clean the halls before her sessions as a consultant. She still stopped to talk with every patient, asking not only about their symptoms, but about their lives, their families, their dreams. She still brought her plants in small cloth bags, prepared with the same care and love as always. Michael visited the hospital regularly, not as a patient, but as a volunteer and benefactor. He talked with other coma patients, holding their hands, telling his own story, offering hope where there was despair. Jessica often accompanied him, and together they became living symbols that recovery was possible. 1 year after Michael woke from the coma, the hospital organized a special celebration, not just to celebrate his recovery, but to mark the success of the integrative medicine program, which had helped dozens of patients and was about to become a permanent department. During the celebration, Michael asked to speak to make a special announcement. "A year ago, I was in a hospital bed, considered a lost cause. Today, I'm standing here, not fully recovered yet, but alive, aware, grateful. This wouldn't have been possible without the combination of excellent modern medicine and the traditional knowledge we nearly lost as a society." He paused, looking at Mrs. Rose, who was sitting modestly in a chair at the back of the hall. "But more than any treatment or technique, what brought me back was something very simple. Someone cared. Someone refused to see me just as a hopeless case. Someone looked at me and saw a human being who deserved every possible effort. Mrs. Rose, please come here." Reluctantly, Mrs. Rose stood up and walked to the front. Michael took her hand and continued. "I'd like to announce that the John Foundation is establishing a permanent scholarship for young people from underprivileged communities who want to study medicine or health-related fields. But with one condition. Part of their training will include learning about traditional healing practices from masters like Mrs. Rose. We want to train a new generation of health professionals who understand that true medicine unites the best of all worlds." The hall erupted in applause. Mrs. Rose covered her face with her hands, too emotional to speak. Sarah went up on stage and hugged both her father and the woman who had become like a second mother to her. "And there's more," said Sarah, holding the microphone. "I've been accepted into a doctoral program where I'll specifically research the integration between Western medicine and traditional practices. My advisor, well, on the scientific side, it will be a professor from NYU, but on the practical side, my true advisor will be Mrs. Rose." More applause, more tears, more hugs. It was a moment celebrating not just a miraculous recovery, but a small yet significant paradigm shift in how we think about health and healing. After the celebration, when everyone had left and the hall was quiet, Mrs. Rose stayed alone for a few moments. She walked to the window, looking at the lights of New York City twinkling in the night. In her hand she held an old worn photo of her and John taken a few months before his accident. "Look, my son," she whispered to the photograph. "Look what your love and your struggle created. You saved not just yourself during those difficult months, but through what I learned from you, you saved many others too. Your time here was short, but your impact will be eternal." She gently kissed the photo before putting it back in her pocket. Then she picked up her broom. Yes, she had insisted on cleaning the hall after the celebration, no matter how many people had offered to do it for her, and began to sweep. It was simple, humble work, but to Mrs. Rose, it was sacred. Every movement of the broom was a meditation, every cleaned corner an act of love. Jessica had stayed too, knowing that Mrs. Rose would try to clean by herself. She took another broom and began to help, the two women working in comfortable silence, a friendship that had been born in crisis, but had deepened into something much more meaningful. "You know what I learned from all this?" said Jessica after a while. "I learned that true healing doesn't just come from herbs or medicines or surgeries. It comes from human connection, from genuinely caring about another person, from being willing to stand by someone even when there are no guarantees, even when everything seems lost." Mrs. Rose stopped sweeping and looked at Jessica, a gentle smile on her face. "You've learned well, my daughter. This is the most important lesson my grandmother taught me. Plants do heal, yes, but love heals more. Presence heals. The refusal to give up heals. In the end, it all comes down to that. The months turned into years. The integrative medicine program continued to grow and evolve. Michael recovered almost completely, returning to work, but in a different way. He reduced his hours, spent more time with his family, dedicated himself more to the John Foundation. He said the coma had given him a strange gift, the gift of knowing what truly matters. Sarah completed her doctorate with distinction, her thesis on integrative medicine being widely cited in academic circles. She opened a clinic that combined both approaches, always with Mrs. Rose as a permanent consultant. The clinic served people from all social classes, with a payment system based on each person's ability, another idea that came from Mrs. Rose, who believed that healing should not be a privilege for those who can pay. Dr. Robert, who was nearing retirement when he met Mrs. Rose, decided to dedicate his final professional years to writing a book about what he had learned. The book, titled Beyond the Borders of Medicine, Lessons from a Wise Janitor, became required reading in several medical schools in the United States. Emily, the young nurse who had witnessed everything from the beginning, was so inspired that she returned to school, specializing in integrative medicine. She opened a clinic in the countryside, bringing Mrs. Rose's teachings to communities that would never have access to these treatments otherwise. But perhaps the most profound changes were the least visible. They were the doctors, who now asked different questions of their patients. They were the nurses who held patients' hands for an extra moment. They were the hospitals that created more humanized spaces, recognizing that the physical environment is also part of healing. It was a small movement in the grand scheme of things, but it was a start, and it had all begun with a janitor who refused to accept that there was nothing more to be done, who chose to believe when no one else believed. Mrs. Rose continued working at the hospital until she was 70. When she finally retired, not by her own choice but because Jessica and Sarah insisted she needed more rest, the hospital organized a farewell ceremony that filled the main auditorium. Patients she had helped over the years, some from decades ago, came to thank her. Doctors and nurses shared stories of how she had changed their approaches to medicine. Students who had learned from her spoke about how her teaching had shaped their careers. But the most moving moment was when Michael took the stage, no longer with a cane, fully recovered now. "Mrs. Rose," he began, his voice emotional, "you gave me something no doctor, no machine, no medicine could have given. You gave me hope. You gave me your unshakable faith in the human ability to heal when surrounded by love and care. You gave me my life back." He paused, wiping the tears that streamed freely down his face. "But more than that, you changed how I lived that life. Before the coma, I was always running, always too busy, always focused on success and money and things that in the end mean nothing. You taught me, through your daily example, that what matters is how we treat people, especially in their moments of greatest vulnerability. You taught me that true greatness isn't in how much money you have or how important you are, but in how many lives you've touched with kindness." He stepped down from the stage and knelt before Mrs. Rose, taking her calloused hands in his. "Thank you. Thank you not just for saving me, but for showing me how to live." Mrs. Rose helped Michael up, hugging him tightly. No words were needed. Love and gratitude flowed between them in a silence more eloquent than any speech. "I only did what any person with a heart should do," she finally said. "I refused to give up on you. And you, my son, you honored that refusal by fighting to come back. We did this together." Mrs. Rose's retirement didn't mean the end of her work. She opened her home to students and healthcare professionals who wanted to learn about traditional medicine. Her small backyard became a medicinal garden where she grew dozens of different plants and taught about the properties of each one. She offered free consultations for people in her community, never charging anything, always insisting that knowledge and healing shouldn't have a price. Jessica and Michael visited her regularly, and over time they became so close that Michael began calling Mrs. Rose Mom, and she called him son. It was a chosen family, united not by blood but by shared experience and genuine love. Sarah brought her own children to meet Mrs. Rose, wanting them to learn about medicinal herbs, and more importantly, about humility and service. The children loved the stories their chosen grandmother told, and they learned to identify plants, prepare simple teas, and understand that healing is both an art and a science. One day, many years after this whole story began, a young doctor visited Mrs. Rose. He had a difficult case, a young patient in a coma, unresponsive to conventional treatments. He had read about Michael's case and wanted advice. Mrs. Rose welcomed him into her simple home, serving lemon balm tea as she listened carefully to his description of the case. When he finished, she was silent for a moment, her eyes distant, remembering. "There's a secret most people don't understand," she finally said. "We humans are stronger than we think. The will to live, when properly nurtured, can overcome obstacles that medicine alone cannot. But it needs to be nurtured, with care, with attention, with love, with constant presence." She stood up and went to her garden, returning with several fresh herbs. "Take these, use them as I taught you. But more importantly, use your heart. Talk to your patient. Hold his hand. Believe in his ability to come back, even when all the data says otherwise, because sometimes it's that belief that makes all the difference." The young doctor left with the herbs and, more importantly, with new hope. Weeks later, he returned to thank her. His patient had woken up. "Was it the herbs?" he asked. Mrs. Rose smiled, that wise and gentle smile so many people had seen over the years. "It was the herbs. It was modern medicine. It was your dedication. It was the family that didn't give up. It was all of it together. Healing never comes from just one source, my son. It comes from the combination of everything that is good: knowledge, care, love, science, tradition, faith, all working in harmony." End of story. And so, what did you think of this story? Was it moving to follow Michael and Mrs. Rose's journey? Leave your comment telling us if you believe in the power of integrative medicine and if you know any similar stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other moving stories like this one. Your participation is very important to us.